All right, the House Local Government Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Chairman Lauer.
Here.
Representatives Crawford. Here. Runstead.
Here.
Howell.
Here.
Alexander. President Frederick.
Here.
Hauk.
Here.
Green.
Here.
Moss.
Here.
Ellison. Here. Sabo.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. First up on the agenda, we have House Bill 4457, introduced by Representative Iden. Do I have a motion to report that bill out with recommendation that it pass? So moved by Vice Chair Crawford. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chairman Lauer.
Yes.
Representatives Crawford. Runstead.
Yes.
Howell.
Yes.
Alexander.
Yes.
Frederick.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Green.
Yes.
Moss.
Yes.
Ellison.
Yes.
Sabo.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 11 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 passes. House Bill 4457 is reported with recommendation.
Well, thank you, Madam Clerk. We have a number of substitutes today. At this time, I'd like a motion to adopt substitute H1 to House Bill 4105. So moved by Representative Crawford. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chairman Lauer.
Yes.
Representatives Crawford.
Yes.
Runstead.
Yes.
Howell.
Yes.
Alexander.
Yes.
Frederick.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Green.
No.
Moss.
No.
Ellison.
No.
Sabo.
No.
Mr. Chair, there are 7 yeas, 4 nays, and 0 passes. The H1 sub to 4105 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'd like a motion to adopt the H1 substitute to House Bill 4334. So moved by Representative Crawford. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chairman Lauer.
Yes.
Representatives Crawford.
Yes.
Runstead.
Yes.
Howell.
Yes.
Alexander.
Yes.
Frederick.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Green.
No.
Moss.
No.
Ellison. Sabo.
No.
Mr. Chair, there are 7 yeas, 4 nays, and 0 passes. The H1 sub to 4334 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And finally, we have an H1 substitute to House Bill 4616. Do I have a motion to adopt? So moved by Representative Howell. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chairman Lauer.
Yes.
Representatives Crawford.
Yes.
Runstead.
Yes.
Howell.
Yes.
Alexander.
Yes.
Frederick.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Green.
No.
Moss.
No.
Ellison. Sabo.
No.
Mr. Chair, there are 7 yeas, 4 nays, and 0 passes. The H1 sub to 4616 is adopted.
Well, thank you, Madam Clerk. At this time, I'd like to call up Representative Pam Hornberger and Representative Beau Lefebvre for testimony on House Bills 4105 and House Bill 4334. Welcome, Representatives.
Thank you so much, Chairman and committee members, for giving Representative Lefebvre and I the opportunity to testify. We're here today to talk to you about House Bills 4105 and 4334, and I'll give you a little bit of background. 4105 will create the Local Government Sanctuary Policy Prohibition Act, which will apply to cities, villages, townships, and charter townships. And Representative Lefebvre's bill directly mirrors 4105, and it will create the same act for counties. It will create a County Sanctuary Prohibition Act. If I can just give you a little insight as to what it would exactly do, 4105 and 4334 will give law enforcement officers, it will empower them to do their jobs. Officers currently take an oath to uphold our Constitution, federal and state laws, and 4105 and 4334 very simply will deter elected officials from passing laws that force local officers to violate their oath of office, or their oath that they take to uphold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with everything my distinguished colleague mentioned. The bill that I've introduced, 4334, simply states that counties can't implement policies that go against federal law. And I think that elected officials need to be held to the same standards as private citizens. And for that reason, I urge my friends on both sides of the aisle to vote in favor of passage of both of these bills.
Okay, well, thank you, members. Appreciate that. Do we have questions from committee members? Representative Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues for being here. I have a few questions, so I will allow the chairman to tell me when my time is up here, and hopefully maybe we can do another round of questions.
And please keep the questions to the H1 sub.
Absolutely. In fact, talking directly to the H1 sub, I find that the epicenter of this legislation in the substitute is Section 5. Which states that a local unit of government shall not enact or enforce any law, ordinance, policy, or rule that limits or prohibits a peace officer or local elected official, officer, or employee from communicating or cooperating with appropriate federal officials concerning the immigration status of an individual in this state. So, I will start off by saying that my community, Southfield, is not a sanctuary city. No one on this panel represents a sanctuary city, but you've drafted a bill, I believe, and I would love to hear your commentary, that's going to impact the day-to-day proceedings in every community in this state by limiting police department rules. Because a police department is a local unit of government under Section 3B of the substitute. So I spoke with my police chief last night, and he told me that there is a rule in his department that they will arrest people only for violating local ordinances or state law. And they are not to ask people of their immigration status. And he told me that that is common practice of police departments throughout the state, assuming that many members of this panel probably have the same police rules within their local departments. He said they don't have the funding or the time to act as federal immigration officials. This was not an action of the city council. This was a police chief rule that he has asked his officers to follow. So why do you want to handicap a police department from enacting policing rules within their own community?
Well, I think as a person who has a disability, I don't want to handicap anybody. But I think that at the end of the day, every single entity within the state needs to comply with federal law.
Well, I don't know if, Rep. Hornberger, you have a response to that.
No, I would agree with Rep. Lefebvre.
So you are now subjecting police officers to criminal penalties for following the directive of their police department to not ask for someone's immigration status.
So is the directive of their police department to not follow the law?
To not act as immigration officials and federalize their authority, but that's common practice in most communities throughout the state. So this is not an act of a city council. This is not an act in defiance. This is to make sure that police officers are enforcing state law and local ordinances.
And that's what we'd like them to do.
I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Ordinances they should be following. That's exactly what this does.
So another concern of mine that I would mention too is that you've communicated that you want your legislation to empower these local officers. I think that was one of the members before us have said that. It also goes beyond, because in that section it forces an employee of a local governing body to communicate and cooperate with appropriate federal officials. So I have a question. Would your legislation empower anyone within City Hall, a secretary in the city clerk's office, to go around City Hall and asking people of their immigration status under the guise of communicating and cooperating with federal officials, and no rule of the administration would stop that employee from doing that?
I don't think that's what this bill is doing, Representative.
It says employee in Section 5. It says that the local unit of government shall not enforce a rule, a policy that would limit a local official, officer, or employee of the local governing body, of the local unit of government, from cooperating or cooperating or communicating with federal officials.
Well, I
Representative Moss, under that scenario, the federal government would have had to ask them to do that, and that seems
That does
quite
not
unlikely.
say that in this legislation. I don't know what communicating and cooperating is.
I'm going to go to Representative Sabo.
I guess I'm not getting an answer to my question. And I had a few others, so I hope I can be recognized during the next round of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Lefebvre, so when you're walking down the street and somebody an officer comes along and you don't look like you belong in this country, and they decide to throw you in jail for a 48-hour period, which I believe this talks about. A lot of our municipalities nowadays are really struggling with jail overcrowding. There's no room in the jails at all to actually hold the actual convicted criminals. So a lot of communities now are going to a system where they have to do early release programs to let people out early that haven't completed their entire sentence. So because you don't look like you belong and you've been thrown into jail, there's going to be, just to be held until they figure out if you do belong or not, there's going to be an actual convicted criminal potentially let loose on the streets, again, potentially endangering the public. How do you feel about that?
Well, Representative, respectfully, that is not what this substitute does. You are not allowed to be arrested and thrown in jail because of what you look like. That is blatantly illegal. We need probable cause.
What is probable cause? Can you tell me what that probable cause would be in this particular instance?
Well, I don't have a law degree, so I'd rather not get into specific examples of what probable cause is or is not. But looking like you don't belong certainly doesn't sound like probable cause to me.
Yeah, and I'm just...
From a layperson perspective,
Yeah.
not a lawyer.
Yeah, you know, it's unfortunately, I believe that this particular legislation just leaves things so wide open. There is no definition, and I tell you what, as a former law enforcement officer in the state and in one of the communities in my district, this is not the type of thing that I would want to have to abide by. I want to have clear direction in what my powers are and what the results of those powers are going to be, and this certainly does not do that. And I'm very afraid, concerned for members of many communities across Michigan who have never had a problem. Some of these communities in rural areas that are going to be subjected to having to devote time to something like this when it's really not even a problem. We're creating legislation in hopes of finding a problem.
Not in hopes of finding a problem, but in an effort to be proactive. And I would hope that our law enforcement agencies and our municipalities aren't not enforcing federal law. So we're not looking to create a problem. But when elected officials pass legislation or laws that require our law enforcement to ignore federal and state laws, then we're trying to be proactive about that not happening. I feel that they put law enforcement officers in conflict and operating outside of the law.
If I may, Mr. Chair, what we're trying to do here is we're actually asking our peace officers of this state, police officers, to go out and do the work of immigration officials when I believe that citizens of many of our communities simply want the laws of that community enforced. And by this legislation, they're not going to be able to do that because they're going to be too busy chasing people around trying to find out who's who.
No one's asking them to chase anyone around.
What are you asking them to do?
If you come into contact with someone who, for some reason, has a taillight out and end up not being able to produce an ID, so you have some probable cause, and then the person can't, is taken in because they don't have a driver's license, then we're asking them to enforce the federal laws that are already on the books.
See,
We're not asking them to do something they're not already required to do.
So we're going to take somebody to jail because they don't have a driver's license.
No, but anyone who's pulled over operating a vehicle without a driver's license, I believe that the law enforcement officers have it's their due diligence to do their job and find out the information on that person.
Who they are.
Thank you, Representative Sabo. It is already illegal to drive without a driver's license.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a question
Yep.
from
Thank you.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. There was a radio conversation last week about county jails. Now, this is all the language in here doesn't get into much detail, doesn't get into probable cause. We're not lawyers, but we are lawmakers. So we do need to know what's going to be going into there. There's only one way to get into a county jail. That's through a judge. There's only one way to get out, through a judge or through time served. If someone is being held, if someone is charged or convicted, their fingerprints get sent through a clemis system, and they may get flagged by immigration control and enforcement, and then possibly a detention request might get sent down to the local police department. Local police don't have, or majority are not set up to hold someone for any length of time. Hence, then you go to the county. County jails, you only get there through a warrant, through a judge. A detention request doesn't have the standing at the local level. Local police, state police follow state law. We can't create agency between local police and federal agencies to do their duty. If a county jail is experiencing overcrowding, which a lot of them are, especially in the metro region, especially in the region that you and I are from, what's going to happen when they decide, I need to be in compliance with this 4105 and release people to stay in compliance, to follow detention requests? Am I going to release dangerous prisoners into the public through this so that I am in compliance with this? There's no plan here.
No,
This is
no,
strictly-
there
this
isn't
is-
a plan here for that, but if they were already in compliance, we wouldn't have that problem.
You're creating it.
Representative, respectfully, I'm going to
Asking them to follow federal law.
I'm going to take issue with your statement that you only get into a county jail if you have a judge's warrant. The fact of the matter is that persons in my county, when you get arrested for DUI, there's not a judicial warrant for your arrest. You get arrested on suspicion of DUI, so you go into the county lockup. But to the point, these substitutes clearly state that a governing body shall not restrict any peace officer from communicating with federal law enforcement. You shouldn't restrict that. That's what this bill does.
Representative Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you could respectfully, if you could call on Representative Moss, continue his line.
I'll pass to Mr. Moss.
Well, the chairman's discretion, I appreciate that.
Representative Moss.
Yeah, I guess the targets of my concern, among many, are that this legislation is written very broadly. And when you're talking about communicating and cooperating with from a local official, officer, employee to communicate and cooperate with federal officials, that's not defined in this statute. And so you are going to get people who are going to widely interpret this as an authority to police as immigration officials. So I want to just clarify, and maybe you can respond here. Nothing in this legislation says that the undocumented immigrant has to have been in custody or has to have been arrested or detained prior to a person to be empowered to cooperate and communicate with a federal official. I think that this is deputizing civilians and giving them a police authority so long as they're an employee of a local unit of government. Is that not a correct interpretation of the plain language in the substitute?
Respectfully, I don't think that's a correct interpretation of the language.
Well, if you want to tighten up the language to make sure that your intent isn't broadly interpreted to give that policing authority, then there should be another substitute forthcoming, because that's exactly what the language of this
And
substitute
then you would
does.
support it?
No, I wouldn't. Because this is morally wrong, but now you're technically wrong as well.
It's morally wrong to
All
follow
right,
federal law.
thank you, Representative Moss. Representative Runstead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What the language is referring to is the same thing that on the federal level, the feds require employees. Basically, you can't block employees from communicating with federal officials. Where could that happen? Well, a lot of police departments have people in a clerical capacity that are not an official officer. In fact, probably many of them do, where that person would be transmitting this information. The person wouldn't be wandering about the town doing a citizen's arrest on this preposterous "what you look like" standard. Police departments are arresting people on probable cause, and it is absolutely impermissible to say, oh, this person looks this way, I'm going to arrest this. This person looks pretty good, I'm not going to arrest this for the same probable cause. You arrest on probable cause, and then the person is brought in and processed. The person in the Parks and Rec isn't empowered by this bill in any preposterous way to be going around and doing citizens arrests. Nothing in this bill says that. What it says is employees, and it's very specific in federal law that employees, this would be people that are empowered through law enforcement to be able to make this arrest. And then the employees who communicate that information clerically to ICE would have to be empowered to do so. Or you could say, well, you're not an official law enforcement officer sworn in, so therefore you're a clerical person. We, the local unit, prohibit you from transmitting this information. So I think we're getting way off into something that absolutely is not even included in this bill. Devoting the time and all this stuff and being federal immigration officers, none of that's applicable. It's when there's arrest that has occurred, now the person is processed into the system, and they're asking about the person's immigration status. And if that's questionable, then they have a ICE detainer to hold them for a period of time, not indefinitely, for a period of time to determine what's going on. What these sanctuary cities want to do is say, we're not holding these people. We very well suspect that they may not be citizens, or we know it, but we're going to release them. That's what this bill addresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Brunstad, and thank you, Reps. Hornberger and LaFave. At this point, we're going to move into some additional comments from stakeholder groups. I'm sorry? You passed, Jim. We'll get back to you later on in the committee. We're limited on time here, so we're going to try to have run through these fairly quickly. At this point, I'd like Susan Reed of the Michigan Coalition for Immigrants to come up for. You had requested 5 minutes. If we could do 3, preferably. Opposes the bill and does wish to speak on both 4105 and 4334. Could you push the red button, please? There you go.
Good morning and thank you. Yes, my name is Susan Reed. I'm managing attorney at the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center and a member of the steering committee of the Michigan Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. We're a coalition of more than 40 nonprofit and religious groups statewide supporting our immigrant and refugee communities. A couple of notes, because I do have that law degree from the previous conversation. Federal courts have found that ICE holds and detainers are in fact issued for less than probable cause. Your citations are Miranda Olivares versus Clackamas County, Oregon, and Santos versus Frederick County Board of Commissioners. So honoring those detainers may violate federal law themselves. It's a very complex area. I know I'm speaking quickly, but I got my 3 minutes. I also want to highlight that racial profiling only seems preposterous to those who have not been racially profiled. In fact, ICE and CBP, Customs and Border Protection, are expressly allowed to use race as a factor in their actions. U.S. v. Briganoni Ponce is the Supreme Court citation allowing them to use race as a factor, but of course using race as a factor would violate our Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act and our state constitution. So there are serious civil rights concerns with mixing these functions, and there are people in this room who, particularly in Southwest Detroit, I hear from a lot of people who live that every day. But what I wanted to highlight in particular was to underline the comments that these bills second-guess the local policies of law enforcement agencies who've chosen simply to focus their resources and communicate that focus to reassure local communities and build community trusts. So local officers are not ICE officers, just like they're not IRS tax collectors or federal wildlife officers. That's a resource decision that many local communities make. These bills also subject cities and counties to liability in multiple directions by, again, creating those incentives to racially profile to create the appearance of maximum compliance, because the bills allow any local resident to file a complaint or sue. And these bills do define coordination and cooperation more broadly than even the U.S. Department of Justice defined it as of May 22nd, when they released a memo that does not go to the breadth of coordination and cooperation, but simply requires compliance with 8 U.S.C. Section 1373. I know I'm going so fast, but this stuff is real. I don't mind only having 3 minutes in the sense that I want to share that I'm going to stay and listen to as much today as I can, but I'm on my way to the Calhoun County Jail to meet with a woman in ICE detention. She is the spouse of a U.S. citizen. She is the mother of U.S. citizens. She is a farm worker. She has no criminal record. She was stopped by local police who handed her over to ICE after arresting her for driving without a license. She's been here more than 10 years, and she's a farm worker. Now, I read articles about growers complaining that their asparagus is rotting in the fields. She's rotting in jail because her local police had a different set of priorities than maybe another local law enforcement agency or another municipality would choose. I think that I can tell you that story is not uncommon. I'd be happy to share with you in the future what this reality looks like on the ground for our clients. I hope that undocumented people will, or people who used to be undocumented, will come and share their experiences and their lives with our very broken immigration system, but I'm concerned that they won't feel safe or comfortable doing that in this room. I do thank you for the opportunity to be heard, and I would welcome contact from your offices as you work on the details of this policy going forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you keeping that brief. At this point, we're going to call up Maximo. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Runstead had a question real quick. I'm sorry. Could you stay for one question?
I could.
Just real quick to clarify, so you cited some area that ICE apparently has some latitude in particular areas to take race into consideration, but you further clarified, which we all know here in Michigan per our Constitution and L.A. Larson, you're not permitted to profile on basis of race to pull people over. Is that correct?
That is correct. Our state and local officers would not be allowed to profile, and yet I think in a situation where members of the public could bring actions against their state or municipality based on their perception of coordination and cooperation, you get overwhelming incentives to profile to create the universal impression that unwelcome people are being removed.
So it is illegal. You can sue on that basis. Secondly, the individual that did not have a driver's license, are there other people in the state of Michigan who could be arrested in other jurisdictions simply for not having a driver's license? Is it illegal to be driving where you could be picked up and arrested for not having when you do not have a driver's license?
You do have to have a driver's license to
Okay.
drive legally in the state of
Thank
Michigan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Maximo, I'm going to apologize. I don't know the last name, but if you could come up here and state your name and who you're with in 2 or 3 minutes, please.
Yes, actually, I will take less than a minute because I don't want to repeat what was already said. Okay, I'm with about 6. I volunteer with 6 organizations in the Lansing area, and I just want to know basically, what is probable cause? Is probable cause my color of my skin? I mean, I don't see. Or is it going to be my pants? Is it going to be my shoes? I don't understand what anybody could use as probable cause to determine that this person might be in the country illegally. I have no idea what it is.
Fortunately, that's not in this legislation. This legislation doesn't address that issue.
I know it, but no, it does. It says a police officer has to have probable cause to believe that somebody is in the country illegally.
That was in the introduced version. We took that out.
Oh, that was taken out? Okay. Okay, but so that's not in there at all? Okay. But okay, police officers in this area, I go to the OPAC meetings, and police officers say that they don't want to do this work, because they are too busy working on real crime, and that they just don't have time to work on a civil infraction, because being undocumented in the United States, first time is a civil infraction. It's like jaywalking. That's truly what it is. You can ask any immigration attorney that, and I guess basically that's basically what I have to say, But these immigrants, I got to say something about these immigrants. They are, as a lot of people know, they are they pay in the Social Security system and they pay taxes, but they cannot receive Social Security, and so they are keeping our Social Security system above water, all the undocumented immigrants.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you so much for being here today
Okay.
and offering that.
Yep.
At this point, I'd like to call up Kimberly Budden and is it Olivia Hernandez with the ACLU of Michigan. Yes, for 10 minutes to speak. If we could keep it to 3 or 4, that'd be very helpful, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Kimberly Budden and Elvira Hernandez from the ACLU of Michigan. So I'm going to go kind of through some of the nuances, and then Elvira is going to talk more about her personal story and the importance of these welcoming city policies and what they mean to the community. Can everyone hear me okay?
If you could
I'm
speak a little
short.
closer to it.
Okay. Sorry. So the ACLU is extremely opposed to these bills, 4105 and 4334. And although we are pleased that the original language was changed to omit some of the very blatant constitutional problems, these bills still they're very problematic. And they're problematic for 2 reasons, because welcoming city policies, majority of welcoming city policies are permissible under federal law, and they are sensible. So I want to talk very shortly about why the policies are permissible under federal law.
I'd like to just jump in there real
Sure.
quick. If they complied with federal law, then these bills would have no impact on those policies whatsoever.
Respectfully, the bills that are before you today go beyond what the federal requirements are, and they are much more strict than what the federal requirements are, and so the policies that are currently permissible under federal law may not be permissible under this law.
And that's fine if that's your opinion, but that's not what you said the first time, so continue.
That's certainly what I said the first time, but I will respectfully disagree. So the federal law, Section 1373, and this has been touched on very briefly, has a very limited scope as to what it prohibits. It very specifically prohibits any policy that limits the sending and receiving of information about a person's immigration status. The bills that are before you today have a much broader language, which says communication and cooperation. Those words are not found in the federal law. And although that may seem like a very small difference, it's imperative because it is unclear what that means. And the sponsors here today were also not able to answer that question. So a majority of policies that we see are policies like don't ask policies. It should be clear that the federal law does not require local police to ask an individual about their immigration status. There's no mandate. It also should be clear that the federal law does not prohibit a policy that says that the local government should not use its resources to do immigration enforcement, or that they can't have a policy that says that they should not detain individuals solely pursuant to an ICE detainer request, which has been documented oftentimes do not contain a judicial determination of probable cause. These are the policies that a majority of sanctuary cities or welcoming cities have. And this is evidenced by the fact that just recently, Jeff Sessions issued an order that said that, yes, sanctuary cities, as we've been looking at them, and what we believe and the rhetoric that's been behind them, is not quite that. It's a very narrow definition, and a majority of jurisdictions are not in violation of the federal law. However, under this legislation, those cooperation, that wording of cooperation and communication is undefined. It's undetermined. It's unclear if any of those policies would be considered to not be cooperating with federal immigration enforcement. And that's what the problem is, because then we're subjecting all of these counties, all of the local governments, to potentially having to defend themselves in court over this, over an issue that otherwise follows federal law. And if the purpose behind these bills is simply to mirror the federal law language, then we should have done exactly that and copied it directly. But if that's not the intention, which seems to be pretty clear here, that's why we're seeing this additional language in. And so if I believe that the bill sponsors' intention is to just mirror that law, then they very clearly could mimic it directly. In addition to that, I want to talk about why welcoming city policies are sensible. because I think a lot of times we're hearing a lot of information about some kind of negative rhetoric around these communities. And it's important that I point out a few important statistics. So these laws help ensure that there is a positive relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. It's been documented. There was a study done that showed that over 2,000 Latinos in Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, and Phoenix revealed that 44% of them are less likely to contact the police in areas that do not have welcoming policies because when they're a victim of a crime, because they are afraid that the police will use that as an opportunity to ask them about their immigration status and then call ICE. They have a positive...
Kimberly, we've got a question from Representative Green.
Please.
So, good morning, or good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Based on some of the statements you made, what would constitute cooperating with federal officials?
Under this law,
Yes,
it's unclear.
it's unclear.
It's completely unclear. And I think that that would be something that a court would have to determine.
Do you think it would include something simply more than just sending information?
My opinion is that because the federal law says that there is a requirement to do the sending of information, and then this bill goes beyond that, that cooperation would be something in addition to that requirement.
So that's the point where it's broader.
Exactly.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Okay, let's move into the other testifier real quick, and then we do have to move on.
Can I have just one more minute to talk about kind of the impact of crime here?
Quickly.
So I just want to quickly note that studies have also shown that communities with welcoming policies have lower crime rates. They have higher household incomes. They have higher labor force participation, in addition to the fact that they have that cities that do not have welcoming city policies or that pass legislation such as this face a significant economic impact in addition to the millions of dollars spent in court as well as the millions of dollars in the effect of tourism. So at this time I'll hand it over to Elvira Hernandez.
Good afternoon, everybody. I too am from the ACLU, but I'm from the west side of the state. Interestingly, one thing that I found interesting was that the bills were actually introduced on January 26th, which happens to be the birthday of our great state. Yet, the state actually shares my birthday. So that's one of the reasons why I know that interesting fact.
Please, let's move quickly through this.
So recently, though, as we all know, the language that's been shared and because of the election has been the language, words, hostility towards the different communities that we all live, work, and study in has made the immigrant communities feel very unwelcome, unfortunately. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you is a story. You know, I grew up and have lived in the small town of Sparta. My children have lived there, have graduated from there, yet I have felt the need to constantly carry around my passport because of having to maybe come across either immigration or law enforcement and have to prove my citizenship because of maybe have to prove it because of what they may see and have to not just take my word, although they have to take my word, oftentimes not having to be detained for those 48 hours until they find out if, in fact, I'm saying the truth. So recently, just a few months ago, in the same town that I grew up in, graduated from, I had a team, a father and son, actually say awful words, just nasty words, and actually yell at me, go back to where you're from. Go back to where you're from, on top of, you know, cursing at me, yelling at me, while people in the same store said nothing, absolutely nothing. So on top of I can only imagine what would happen if you give this kind of power to law enforcement, to the cities and towns. You know, I'm a pretty educated person. I knew how to be able to come here and share my story to you. I know how to be able to access the different networks to be able to go and just be able to defend myself and to be able to control myself when people, ignorant people, attack me or my children. And yet, if somebody else, even maybe even my husband, were to receive that kind of awful words, maybe they wouldn't be able to contain themselves. So that's more than anything.
Well, we appreciate you being here and sharing that story. Thank you so much. We do have a question for, I think, one of you guys from Representative Runstead.
Yes, it's more of a comment referring to welcoming committees, cities, or welcoming policies. Throughout Michigan, a lot of communities refer to themselves that way. That has nothing to do with not enforcing federal immigration law. They like immigrants that they have in their community to know that there's resources available to them. So conflating that term, which most people find is very acceptable and causes no controversy, and say that these are the same communities that also are violating federal immigration law is not the same thing. And I think there's a purpose behind that that I'm not happy with. Also, this comment about hostility towards communities. There's no hostility towards communities. Empowering the police to do this or that thing. What they're doing is saying currently all police can follow federal immigration law. What this is saying for those communities that are violating the law is saying you cannot. So I guess it was more of a comment than a question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I thank both of you for being here
Should
today.
I not
and
respond to that?
We're going to have to move on. I'm sorry. It was just a comment. So we're going to move on
Thank
to
you.
Reverend Fred Thalen with the action of Greater Lansing, wishes to speak. Again, if we could keep it within the 3 minutes, opposes the bill. He's taken off. Okay. Nope, we'll move on to the next person. Kathy Dunbar, Lansing City Council. Is Kathy here with us today? Hi, Kathy. I guess you'll get Fred's time at this point. Opposes the bill. Again, if you could speak for a couple, 2 or 3 minutes on that, we'd certainly appreciate it.
There we go. This is my first chance reading the substitute, so I appreciate that the parts that I had immediate concern with have been removed from this, but I do want to make a few points. I'm a local city council member here in the city of Lansing, and I was involved in the sanctuary issues here in town that resulted in the executive order with the protections that we have in place. It's really important to me to echo that local jurisdictions should have the right to have rules with their police departments that allow them to enforce their own laws. I'm concerned by anything that says that local officials must enforce federal law, but we're choosing federal immigration law in this case. We're choosing it. We don't enforce federal tax law. We don't enforce federal maritime law. You can pick a whole host of different things that have jurisdictions at the federal level, that have laws at the federal level, and the enforcement of which is in the jurisdiction of the federal government, and not ask local law enforcement to take on that responsibility. But this is actually asking us to take on that mantle when we have to enforce our own laws and deal with issues within our community that are important to our community. As far
Kathy,
as
I'd like to point out that that is not in the legislation. The legislation simply says that we can't limit the local government's ability to communicate with the federal officials. So it doesn't say anything about they have to enforce federal law. That's just simply not in the bill, but please continue.
Okay. If there's nothing to report, there's nothing to communicate. So, you know, we having policies, I would argue that in the policies that we have in the city of Lansing, nothing violates federal law, but we have the potential to violate this. And so it does go beyond the scope of, I believe, as Kimberly said, the federal law. I want to point out there's family implications and welfare implications with this. I run a nonprofit that works with low-income individuals and at-risk individuals in South Lansing. We do have families who have undocumented members. We have families with children who are citizens, but their parents are undocumented. And enforcement of a rule like this that would basically turn over folks to ICE in this regard, you're creating more of a welfare state. Who will take care of these children when the parents are gone? What is the safety net for that? We're talking about not wanting to be a drain on the welfare system, but this actually creates a scenario where we have to provide more care to American citizens. There's that myth that immigrations are draining our financial resources, but no, immigrants are not eligible for welfare. They are not getting housing assistance. They're not getting food stamps. Their children may be, and they will continue to do that after their parents are removed, in addition to the fact that we now have to care for those children. And I want to also step
Can you
up.
wrap up, please, Kathy?
Yes. Fourth Amendment issues with detainers. I just want to, if cooperation in this sense includes enforcement of detainers, which are ruled in many courts to be voluntary. It has been found by the Supreme Court to be voluntary. There are no cases where a city's been held liable for not enforcing a detainer, but they have been held liable and they have paid damages for enforcing detainers that violate Fourth Amendment rights, for being held without due process, for being held without warrants. So I do want to point out that you are opening up with this, if cooperation includes detainers, cities for liability and creating a financial risk for us in that regard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. We've got about 10 minutes left on these two bills before we move into another one. I think I'm going to try to call both Melissa and Maria with the Washtenaw Immigration Justice at the same time. I believe you're with the same organization. So if you'd come up together and please make some comments. They both oppose the bill, and we'll allow about 3 minutes.
My name is Maria. I live in Ypsilanti Township. I am also undocumented. I've been in the U.S. since I was 9 years old. I'm now 27, so I've been in the U.S. for about 18 years and currently have DACA status. And even though I was a little bit nervous to share that with you, I think it's important for you to know what someone who's undocumented looks like, who putting a face to this metaphorical concept of illegal immigration, which that term is just horrible. A little about myself. I recently graduated from the University of Michigan with a Master's of Social Work, and I work as a social worker in the Ypsilanti Ann Arbor area. And I love my job, I love what I do, and I love being in this community, but I want to live in a state that that supports me and respects me and understands the issues and has an educated understanding of immigration. So I have 5 reasons for why I oppose this vote, or these two bills. The first one is, again, it forces police departments to enforce something that they really have no resources or no time to work on this. It breaks the trust between community members and police departments. So when people witness a crime or something is related to crime, they're afraid to go to the police if they think they're going to be deported. Secondly, thirdly, it ignores the huge financial contributions that immigrants bring to this country. So it's estimated that in Michigan in 2014, undocumented immigrants contributed $82.9 million to the state of Michigan. And we are completely ignoring the financial contributions that immigrants bring to the country. Again, the welfare, so we say that immigrants are a drain of welfare. That is not true. Undocumented immigrants cannot receive any benefit that requires a social security number. And I think the last part is that this bill is actively seeking to harm relationships between the community and turn neighbor on each other. So if someone thinks that I might be undocumented, they can just call the police and really break the trust and the community and the solidarity that we're trying to build within different communities in the state of Michigan. I don't believe that we want to be in a state that turns people in against each other. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. Representative Ellison, I believe, has a question he'd like to ask you guys.
No, my question is not for these speakers. My question is to what I wanted to ask 12 speakers ago.
At that time you pass, I'm sorry, Representative, we'll deal with it at the next committee hearing then.
In all due fairness, I didn't realize that, this is kind of the no good deed goes unpunished. I simply gave Mr. Moss the chance to speak in front of me. I didn't realize I was giving up my opportunity to speak.
I apologize, Representative. Okay, well, at this point in time, we certainly appreciate your comments. Is there anything further for these two? I'm going to ask if Ben O'Hare and Oscar...
I I hadn't been able to speak yet.
Oh, go ahead then, for real quick. We're trying
I'm also with the Washtenaw Immigrant Justice Coalition, but I'm also here representing thousands of people who are involved with the People Power campaign. That's an ACLU campaign. I'm also here for myself as a resident of this state and of Washtenaw County. I'm very proud of Washtenaw County, and I want to tell you why we moved to Washtenaw County, because we could have moved anywhere in the world. My husband is an expert in energy. He is a vice president at DTE Energy. When we decided to move away from Georgia, we could go to Rome, Italy, we could go to Stamford, Connecticut, we could go to Palm Beach, Florida, and we chose Washtenaw County. And we chose it because it's an amazing community. It receives high scores in crime, meaning there's low crime, education. They have some of the healthiest people in the state. They're in the top 10. We chose that community. It's very diverse. We like that. This community is this way because of the people that are in the government there, including the Sheriff's Department. The policies that the Washtenaw County Commissioners voted on are not policies that they came up with on their own. These are policies that have been around for decades, that are implemented by the Sheriff's Department because that is the way he chose to run his organization, and it's working. And that's why me and my family are there, and that's why a lot of people choose that county to go to. When I read these bills, and I'm also an attorney, I hate to say the racism. In fact, my husband said, don't use that word because it turns people off. But you know what? I know that the politically correct thing to say would be to say it's un-American. And I'm not going to go there. I'm going to call a spade a spade. This could lead to racism. You might not in your heart say this is racist. But that's not going to be in everybody else's heart that might have to implement this. I grew up in Georgia, and I saw a lot of racism there. So I know what it looks like. I know how people talk behind closed doors when people of color are not in the room with them. I just think you're opening up a Pandora's web, and you're saying that you think that you know better than the people that are running their own counties and their own cities, and I don't think that's right.
Well, thank you very much for your comments, and I think we've allowed wide latitude here as far as the people testifying, and we're trying to get as many voices heard as we can on this, and we will have it up at an additional committee hearing for anybody we don't get to. With that in mind, I'd like to try to call up Benjamin O'Hare and Oscar Castrata, I believe it is, with Action for Greater Lansing and the Michigan Legal Aid at the same time, if we could, and just get some brief remarks, and these will probably be the last two we have on these particular bills for today, and then we'll move into the next bill on the agenda.
Hi, my name's Ben. I'm with Migrant Legal Aid, and I'll just make 4 really brief points. One, I don't think this is going to make us a safer community. Los Angeles Police Chief Charlie Beck has said reports of sexual assault have dropped 25% among the city's Latino residents since the same time, or compared to the same period at this time last year, and reports of domestic violence have dropped 10%. I don't think this has made the world a better place. I don't think it's just like suddenly everyone became good overnight. I think it's because people are afraid of the aggressive immigration and things that are going on. Second, this will not help our economy. Agriculture is a $1 billion industry here in Michigan, and a substantial portion of that economy relies on hand harvests to pick the fruit at the appropriate times. If we're scaring them away, those crops will go to waste. Third, this will lead to aggressive enforcement and racial stereotyping. By giving every person the ability to sue the local government and government officials for any alleged policy, these governments and officials may feel they have no choice but to demonstrate the absence of a sanctuary city policy through aggressive questioning of immigration status. And four, surrendering this would be surrendering some of our constitutional freedoms as a state. The Supreme Court has held that the federal government cannot require the local governments to enforce laws. We're saying, well, you know, we have that freedom, we're just going to get rid of it ourselves. In short, this policy will lead to a Michigan where police officers will be motivated to ask every person for their papers. This is not the freedom that the founders of our country envisioned. Local knows best. Let the federal government enforce federal laws and let local communities create their own policies that foster safety, civil rights, and economic security.
Good afternoon. My name is Oscar Castañeda. I work half-time with Action for Greater Lansing, organizing civil rights for immigrants. And my other half, I teach in Michigan State University. I taught for 16 years full-time in Michigan State University. I write software for geographic information systems, and I used to be part of the team that created Google Maps. A lot was said already from all those experts in here. They are really experts in law. Now, I have a qualification that nobody else has in this room. I speak with an accent. And because I speak with an accent, I know what is to be harassed. And I respectfully disagree with Representative Reinstead when he says that there are no communities harassing here, because yes, we are, every single day. And I get stopped by the police, and I get asked for my ID, and I get asked for my status, even though I am legal in this country. I want to make 2 points here really quick. One is, I don't get it, and I would like to hear an explanation. When DACA was approved by the previous federal administration, the state government didn't want to recognize DACA. And it was said that it was not necessary to cooperate with the federal government. And it took a lot of fighting to get DACA accepted. Now it's the other way around. Now there's this real desire and energy to cooperate with the federal government. I don't get it. I've been here 27 years. I still don't understand this difference in between federal and state governments. The other point that I wanted to make is out of this bill, what really gives me the shivers is Section 9, when it says that any person can go after a community, a city, a municipality. Any person can go after them and complain about this community not complaining with the law. That reminds me very much of the police state where I grew up in Guatemala in the 80s, where anybody could go after anybody just because they didn't like him or because he was a bad neighbor and create serious problems for people. So at the very least, this Section 9 should be taken out of this bill. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both very much. I believe we do have one quick question for you from Representative Runstead.
Yes, you claimed that apparently, from what I was able to discern, that you were detained or arrested on the basis of race. If that were the case, obviously that's illegal under Elliott Larson in our state constitution. So obviously you filed a civil rights complaint and you filed lawsuit in those cases. Is that accurate?
No, because I had been afraid. And when I tried to follow up with the police hide the information of the police officers who were harassing me.
So the ACLU, who is here today, would not insist in this very blatant case of violation of your civil rights. Is that accurate?
Can you repeat the question, please?
The ACLU, who is here and would take cases like this very seriously, that police just arbitrarily looking at the race of an individual, pulling them over with no probable cause. I'm certain that if that were the case, that you would have a lawsuit that would definitely be sustained and a civil rights complaint. So I'm just curious why, up to this point, with all these times that you've referenced this happening, that you haven't taken advantage of the free legal help I'm sure that would be available through the ACLU, who is here specifically testifying in this bill package.
Yeah, I didn't do it because I was afraid, the same way that 90% of the immigrant community is. And if it happens to me today, I will do it, believe me.
Thank you.
One final question on this topic today from Representative Sable.
Mr. Chair, actually, the question is for you. Just in the interest of fairness, can we hear from the individuals or organizations that are here today that are in favor of the bill?
We're going to actually move on. I don't know if I have any cards at this point in time, but I'd have to sort through them. Oh, yeah, there's some here that we haven't gotten to today, but thank you, Terry.
Okay, thank you.
At this point, I'd like to move on to testimony on House Bill 4616, introduced by Representative Howell. I'm going to give him a second to sit before us and present his bill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and fellow members of the Local Government Committee. I am not here to talk about sanctuary cities. I'm here to talk about a far different constitutional and statutory right. My bill, House Bill 4616, which you approved as in substitute form this morning, simply attempts to provide a citizen with the right to enforce their constitutional rights and their statutory rights. The Michigan Constitution, Article 1, Section 6 says, and I quote, "Every person has a right to keep and bear arms for the defense of himself and the state." In 1990, this legislature adopted Public Act 319. That's 27 years ago. We are one of 43 states that adopted a statute like that, preempting local ordinances that attempt to infringe on our firearms rights. That statute affects cities, villages, townships, and counties. And it says, local government shall not impose any ordinance or regulation as to firearms except as allowed by state or federal law. So the whole thrust of my bill is simply to give citizens a right to exercise those two rights under the Constitution and under Michigan statute. Despite that statute, and despite 27 intervening years, there are still instances around the state of Michigan where there are local communities adopting ordinances that infringe on firearms rights. A cursory checking just the internet showed over 30 of those ordinances. I'm sure there's many more if I had time to research every municipal code in the state of Michigan. What I'm trying to avoid is a citizen being unfairly imposed upon. If I live in a community that has an invalid ordinance and I am ticketed, what is my remedy now? My remedy is to go to court and defend myself, which means I've got to hire an attorney at my expense to defend myself in court to prove that I'm being charged under an invalid ordinance. That's not fair to put that burden on a citizen when they are simply exercising legal rights. I spent over 40 years as a municipal attorney. I represented townships, cities, villages, counties. The Open Meetings Act was my touchstone in developing this bill, because in representing my municipal clients, I found that one of the strongest incentives they had to follow the Open Meetings Act was that that law has a provision that says, if I as a citizen have my rights abridged, I'm held out of a meeting, I'm kept out of an illegal closed meeting, I'm not given information I deserve, I, as a citizen, can bring an action against that municipality. And if I win and prove my point, I can be reimbursed the full costs of my action and my reasonable attorney fees. That is a real enforcement tool to make sure that our local governments comply with the Open Meetings Act, and it's worked very well in Michigan ever since 1976, when it was adopted. So I've adopted that same strategy on this. How can we let our citizens effectively defend themselves and effectively prevent those kinds of improper ordinances from being adopted? My bill is quite straightforward. Even though we've had 27 years' notice that you shouldn't be adopting these things, we're going to give them another 60 days after the effective date of this bill if it becomes law. After those 60 days, if they're still sitting on their hands and not getting rid of those invalid ordinances, at that point, any citizen of that municipality, not the whole world, but of that municipality. So if I'm unhappy with my Deerfield Township Board about that, I can go to court and say, Judge, my township board is unfairly restricting my firearms rights. I want that set aside. If I can prove my case, I'm entitled, under my bill, to get an injunction against further enforcement, to order the repeal of this invalid ordinance, and, most importantly, to be reimbursed my costs and reasonable attorney fees. Beyond that, if that public official basically ignores everything and knowingly and willfully goes ahead, despite all this notice and effort, and attempts to enforce or adopt that ordinance, he or she can be held personally liable for a fine between $2,500 and $7,500, which is a heck of an incentive to follow the law and not be doing these kinds of improper things. It also allows the Attorney General to investigate and take action in appropriate cases. He would be able to achieve the same remedy I just described that the average citizen would be able to avail themselves of. So in summary, my bill is the essence of simplicity. I'm not asking for any new rights to be established for Michiganders. I'm simply asking that those rights they have under the Constitution and under the statutes be enforced. Thank you. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Howell. I believe we do have a question from Representative Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative. I will be tempered and measured with my questions here.
You were always tempered and measured.
Thank you.
Moss, and I
Say that louder, and I would appreciate that. So this is actually, I served on the committee as vice chair last year, and this was introduced last year. A version of it, and there were two issues that I want to ask you for your guidance, because I know you're a local municipal attorney and a school board member, and I genuinely want your input on two of the concerns that were brought up, mainly dealing with two local governing bodies, school boards and airport authorities. So I know you're a former school board member, right? So this bill passed on May 4th, 2016, last year out of this committee. On May 9th, so a few days later, my high school that I went to in my district, there was an individual who was reported to have been carrying a firearm. And due to school board policy, the school went on lockdowns, classes were dismissed or canceled or delayed, and they had to assess the situation given the best information they had available at the time. Now, if that individual who caused a lockdown or caused school class delay was later found out, if he was later found out to have been lawfully carrying a firearm, then that school board's policy and the school board individuals are subject to penalties, I believe, and I'm looking for your guidance under this legislation, because a lockdown and canceled classes and delayed education would be gun laws that are stricter than what the state of Michigan allows. We wouldn't shut down public facilities, just because somebody is lawfully carrying a firearm. So there was a concern from school board members that this would subject them to penalties for enacting policies to create a safe school and safe learning environment, because perhaps somebody's carrying a firearm would require them to go above and beyond what state law would allow. And then, Mr. Chairman, I have an additional question after this one.
Yeah, let me answer the first one first,
yes,
if you don't mind, Mr. Moss. Definition in the statute. This is the existing definition, which I'm not changing. This law covers cities, villages, townships, and counties. Doesn't cover school districts. Okay?
Okay. Second question, and so you're probably going to give me the same answer, but I want you to be aware that I think that there is an interpretation under some pending case that was at least pending last May, and I don't know if it's been settled since then, that regardless of the way that we define it in this particular bill, that local unit of government still might apply to school and might apply to airport authority. And of course, airport authority, right up until you probably deal with FAA regulations, you can't carry a firearm. But when you get into the ticketing area of the airport will enact gun restrictions stricter than what the state allows. So is your interpretation that also airport authorities are not covered under this legislation? Because that is a local governing body. Well, and some of them are within complete municipalities, cities, villages, or townships.
Right. As you probably know, there are as many interpretations as there are attorneys and judges. Although it mystifies me how when the statute says in black and white, cities, villages, townships, and counties, you can interpret that to say school districts. That's a more creative attorney than I've ever been able to be. A definition that black and white, I think they're just flat wrong. And authorities are also not covered in the explicit definition.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, thank you both. If there's nothing further, we're going to move into some stakeholder. Was there another? Okay. Okay. Yeah, you're good, Gary.
Thank you very much.
At this point, I'd like to call up Linda Danders with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. She opposes the bill and wishes to speak for 3 minutes. Linda, thank you for being here and welcome. The red button.
Oops. Chairman Lauer and Committee, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Linda Danders, and I'm from Okemos. I'm also a member of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. I'm a proud Michigander, a mother of 2, and grandmother of 5. and a volunteer with the Michigan chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Moms Demand Action is a grassroots movement of American moms and dads fighting for public safety measures that respect the Second Amendment while protecting Americans from gun violence. Moms Demand Action is part of Everytown for Gun Safety, which is the largest gun violence prevention organization in the country with more than 3 million members. I'm here today representing thousands of Michigan moms who oppose HB 4616, the punitive preemption bill. This bill would line the pockets of the gun lobby by giving trial lawyers for the NRA and other out-of-state special interest groups the power to sue our local Michigan governments for enacting and enforcing reasonable gun laws and entitling them to damages, costs, and attorney fees, all at Michigan taxpayer expense. This bill isn't about enforcing the law. It's about doing favors for the gun lobby and its lawyers. That's just not right for Michiganders. Our lawmakers should be spending time trying to better protect our communities, not letting out-of-state special interests sue the hardworking people who keep our communities safe. Only months after a similar bill went into effect in Pennsylvania, lawsuits were filed against 4 cities in that state, including one filed by a gun lobby group from Texas. As a mom, I'm concerned about the toll this bill will take on our cities and the way that local public safety officials work to maintain the safety of our communities. I urge you to vote no on HB 4616, and thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. At this point, I'd like to call up Tom Lambert with the Michigan Open Carry, supports the bill and wishes to speak for about 3 to 5 minutes. Tom, if you could keep that within that time frame, the committee would certainly appreciate it.
My name is Tom Lambert. I am the President and Legislative Director of Michigan Open Carry. First, I'd like to address a few questions that have been asked. Representative Moss, you asked a question about school districts. As the principal for the primary litigant in the litigation you talked about, we can even set aside that litigation and know this would not apply to school districts in the example you brought up. State law specifically authorizes school districts to go into lockdown effectively at their discretion. However, let's even say that, let's now set the clear state law aside and go even deeper. In the litigation that was brought up, there's something that a lot of people have missed, and that's specifically that even we have agreed that the Public Act 319 does not apply to schools. Let that sink in. We're the ones pushing the legislation, saying these schools are preempted, and we have flat out said multiple times, including in front of the Court of Appeals, that that act does not apply to schools. There's a difference between statutory preemption and field preemption. And the argument we have put forward is one of field preemption, not statutory preemption. And I don't know how everybody has missed this, but even 3 judges on the Court of Appeals completely missed this, even while our attorney explained it to them in person. So, multiple levels that know this would not apply to a school going in lockdown. Airport authorities, it would depend on how the airport authority is set up. As to the general thrust of this legislation, myself and my organization greatly support the general thrust. There's a quote from a former mayor of Grand Rapids when he refused to remove legislation that they acknowledged was illegal, or an ordinance they acknowledged was illegal. When asked on TV, on camera, he said, "Hip hip hooray, if somebody doesn't carry a gun to a city commission meeting because they're confused about their rights. I'm okay with that." I think that is entirely wrong. He can disagree with it, but for him to knowingly and willingly break the law to the detriment of the specific people he was sworn to serve, that is incredibly egregious to me. As to tell you how this would work, a number of years ago, Capital Area District Library sued my organization. It went all the way to the Court of Appeals and even went to the Michigan Supreme Court, where Michigan Supreme Court denied cert. My organization ended up winning that. It was Capital Area District Library versus Michigan Open Carry. We later FOIA'd Capital Area District Library to find out that they spent well over $100,000 in legal fees, probably closer to $120,000. Just 1 year after they eventually lost that case, they went to their citizens for a millage for an extra $100,000 for funding. This isn't just about groups. And I would say it's less about groups than it is protecting the taxpayers. When it's not your own money, I'm sure you can understand that perhaps you're not necessarily as careful about how you can spend it. $120,000 fighting a lawsuit to protect something that was illegal. Let that really sink in. Today, my group is currently engaged in litigation against the owners of the DeVos Performance Hall in Grand Rapids. We had a settlement meeting with the regional manager of the authority.
Tom, we're going to have to wrap up pretty quick.
Just wrapping up. First words out of their mouth were, "We messed up." They repeatedly said, "We messed up, we messed up, we messed up." We've tried again and again and again to reach a settlement with this group, but they refuse to settle with us, so now we have to go to court. Their costs go up, our costs go up. It doesn't make any sense. Follow the law. It's really that simple. Before I finish here, I would like to say, while we are in great support of the general thrust of this legislation, we oppose the substitute. We do not agree with the changes in the substitute. It is our opinion that the substitute guts and really changes what the bill does in a very bad manner. In the introduced bill, there's a 90-day buffer. That buffer is no longer there. I understand there's after 60 days, somebody can bring it up, but going forward, state law changes. What happens when local ordinance doesn't change along with it? They would have to be very, very careful locally to make sure they're always in compliance with state law as state law changes. That 90-day buffer that's in the original introduced version allows a citizen like me to bring it to the attention of the local government first and give them an opportunity to amend it on their own before we start bringing the punishments in play. As for the AG, that's a great addition in there, but let's be careful with the AG. Even under the current Attorney General, they've been nothing but deaf to us. I would love the AG to help us out. If this AG is not going to do it, I'm not going to put any faith in that avenue. It requires that the person be a resident of the local jurisdiction. I think that's an equal protection issue. I'm not a resident of Wayne County, but if I go to Wayne County and I'm subject to one of these illegal ordinances, shouldn't I be able to fix that? And the last one is it does not address mootness. The introduced version addresses mootness, the sub does not. What that is this happened in Florida frequently, and this is why it's very important, is these local entities know that it costs organizations like mine a lot of money to fix their illegal ordinances. And so they'll force us to sue them, and they'll drag us throughout the entire process. And then right before the judge is ready to issue an opinion on it, this has happened in Florida, they'll amend their ordinance, or they'll change it, and so then the judge will say, well, now the issue is moot, so I'm not going to award fees anymore. That is a very important issue, and it is a known tactic that municipalities have used across the state. For those reasons, again, we support the overall intent, but we oppose the substitute.
Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate it.
Are there any questions?
I don't believe so at this time.
Thank you, sir.
We're running a little short on time. I'm going to try to read in some cards here before we adjourn. Sergeant Matt Williams of the Michigan State Police does not wish to speak, supports House Bill 4616. Hem Baldwin of Moms Demand Action does not wish to speak, opposes 4616. Kimberly Baden, ACLU of Michigan, opposes 4616. Let's see here. Another Moms Demand Action, Emily Kolku, does not wish to speak, opposes 4616. Judy Allen, Michigan Township Association, opposes 4616. And Ben Bodkin, Michigan Sheriff's Association, opposes 4616. I'm going to move back into a couple of cards here from the previous bills. House Bill 4334, Marty Posacani, representing himself, supports the legislation, does not wish to speak. Judy Allen with the Michigan Townships Association opposes the 4105. Again, Hem Baldwin opposes 4105 and 4334. Linda Danders, again, opposes 4105, 4334. A lot of these are the same folks. National Association of Social Workers opposes 4105, 4334. That's Alan Wickerdorf, I believe. I apologize for any mispronunciations. Michigan League for Public Policy, Rachel Richards opposes 4105, 4334. Ben Bodkin, Michigan Sheriffs, opposes 4105, 4334. And finally, Every Town for Gun Safety opposes 4616. So thank you very much, committee members. At this time, could I get a motion to approve the minutes from the May 17th meeting? So moved by Representative Crawford, without objection, so ordered. At this point in time, the House Local Government Committee will stand adjourned. Thank you.